Well, hello, Vicki Voss.
Yes, hello Fiona. How are you this evening?
I'm fine. I am Fiona Falcone, and you are Vicki Voss, and we come from opposite sides of the political divide. And I do want to say, oh, by the way, that's me from the right, you from the left. And I do want to
Yes.
say, we come from opposite sides, not opposite ends, because neither of us is really on the extreme end of our political spectrum. I think both of us kind of hedge towards the middle, and we do have some overlap in our beliefs, but we are nevertheless on opposite sides. And I understand that you wish to blue pill me tonight. Or to
Yes,
try.
I do. Yes, I'm going to try to blue pill you. Yes, on a particular issue. So, like you said, we have been what I was saying was we have been friends for a long time, and belong to different political parties. Had many discussions over the years, and one thing that we tend to agree on is women's issues in
Yes.
general, and I know we've talked about women's issues a lot on these talks, and there is a particular issue that I know that you do not care for at all, and I'm going to try to convince you that it is still necessary, particularly for women, and that is on the topic of affirmative action. So I know that conservatives really dislike most affirmative action policies, and they feel like it just goes against the very idea of equality. The very concept is unequal, how it's traditionally been practiced, I guess. But I'm going to try to convince you that it is still necessary, because affirmative action not only benefits minorities, but it also benefits women. And I know we don't normally bring up like lots of statistics on these talks because this is pretty informal. However,
Yep.
just out of curiosity, because it's really hard to quantify what the problem is with women and employment in the workplace. We had prior talks about the woman that you talked about, who was harassed at work.
Oh, she was harassed. Yes.
Yeah, like 50, 60 years ago or something. And how those things still go on today. And a lot of times we talk about these things, and so many women have stories like this, but it's really hard to nail down statistics. And that is the same problem when it comes to women in the workplace. However, the Department of Labor website, which I perused just out of curiosity, it actually has put together some substantial reports on this topic, which I just kind of skimmed. I didn't go into I didn't look into great detail, but the numbers really are just still terrible in terms of women in managerial positions. Women kind of getting stuck in entry-level roles, women being mistaken for junior-level employees even at work, even when they are managers, and being treated accordingly. Women being saddled with the majority of childcare and caregiving duties still, which prevents a lot of times their ability to get promoted at work and that sort of thing. And so I'm going to try to convince you that the thing that acts as a buffer for all of these problems that women face in the workplace is affirmative action. And like I said, I know conservatives hate this because it's essentially it's putting some sort of quota on employers, to say, well, you have to meet this certain quota of diversity. You have to have this many women, this many people of color, blah, 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 blah. I know conservatives hate this. However, I looked into the actual law of affirmative action, and it's actually illegal for them to accept in very specific cases to be meeting a quota. It's really just affirmative action is really just a guideline. And I feel, and kind of after looking into it a little bit, I feel like affirmative action as a concept, as an idea, as an influence is still very necessary because of women continuing to struggling to be, promoted at work and in positions, especially trying to move up the ladder. And I feel that affirmative action's influence helps counter that a little bit. And that's why I think that we need to continue to maintain affirmative action.
Okay, for
That
women.
all makes sense? Well, I think we need to maintain it as a policy, and I think I think that it benefits women. I think we need it especially for women, because, and that goes for women, white women and women of color, women overall, which I feel is a bigger problem after looking at some of the Department of Labor numbers than race-based, I guess, affirmative action. That's what it looks like. And so I'm trying to convince you that we should maintain affirmative action, particularly because I think women still need it.
Well, let's get a definition of affirmative action that you and I both agree on.
Okay. Well, the way it's supposed to work is if you have two resumes, you have one for a man and one for a woman, and the woman is just as qualified, if not more so, than the man. But that person, just because of their own bias or because of their own bias, places preference on the man. It's designed to prevent that from happening. So, which apparently, the reason the affirmative action somebody came up with affirmative action in the first place is because that is what was happening, where you have a woman that had just as many qualifications, if not more so, but because she's a woman, didn't want to be hired, especially when it comes to management and senior management and higher level executive positions.
Okay, how does affirmative action prevent that from happening? How does it prevent that from happening?
Well, because I think that since the concept of affirmative action was created, it has companies now have. I actually used to work for an organization that did this. A lot of companies, because they want to abide by the laws, the guidelines of affirmative action, enforce training, especially for their HR department and hiring managers and that sort of thing. And I believe that and I know you conservatives hate this, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that sort of thing. But I do believe that training, because I used to work for a company that actually did this. It has an impact and helps people not only understand maybe recognize where they might have biases in their hiring. It helps them. I don't know. I guess keep their own biases in check to a certain degree when they're hiring, especially because most hiring managers are men.
Okay, so
if that makes sense.
The definition that I'm deriving from your descriptions are something like affirmative action is a mindset. It's just
yes.
An awareness.
That's exactly how I perceive affirmative action. Yes, a mindset and an awareness.
Okay. So it's not really a policy. For instance, it's not a policy like the one that Harvard and the University of North Carolina had, which were struck down by the Supreme Court, in which they literally did give preferences to people in admissions based on their race.
Right. Yes, I'm aware of that case. Yes.
Okay, so it's not that.
Not really. No, it would be an awareness. It would be an awareness that employees and managers are trained on, which is exactly. This is exactly what happens in most corporate workplaces already. If you have a pool of candidates and it is clear that the most qualified candidate is a woman of color, for instance, then it is illegal for you to pass over, or it is against affirmative action policies or discrimination policies for you to overlook that candidate in favor of somebody else.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. And what about if you just happen to really, really like the idea of giving as many jobs as possible to women of color, but the most qualified candidate is a white male?
Yes, and then that's the candidate that you have to choose if that's the most qualified candidate.
Okay, it sounds to me as though this is pretty much what people are doing right now. They pick the most qualified candidate.
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. And okay. Again, I don't think they do. And I think that and that's why I think we continue to need affirmative action policy. So so again, I just skimmed Department of Labor, statistics a little bit, because I know we don't necessarily like to get deep into statistics, but the overall, the statistics still just don't match up. It's women's employment in managerial positions, and also executive level positions are absolutely dismal, and managerial positions is still like just a quarter of overall compared to men, which is like 75%. And yet women, when you look at their education, women have surpassed men in college education levels. So it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? It's clearly there are more highly educated women than men now, and yet women still only occupy like a quarter of managerial positions in major corporations, Fortune 500 or whatever. And so for that reason, the numbers, if you feel like you can trust the Department of Labor numbers, I don't know how they gather that information, but at a glance, it still looks pretty uneven. It doesn't add up.
Okay.
So that tells me, so if I were to interpret that, I would say, okay, we now have more highly educated women than men, so why is it that we still have 75% of all managers and executive level employees are men?
Okay.
Climbing up the corporate ladder.
Right, okay. I think I see a difference right here. You interpret it that way.
Yes.
You interpret it as it's evidence of bias. It's evidence that people are still refusing to hire qualified women, to hire and promote qualified women on the basis of their gender. Okay.
Right.
I would say that it's not necessarily evidence of that, because
what do you
all,
think? How would you interpret that then?
Okay. Well, first of all, women are far more inclined than men to take breaks in their career for childbearing, child raising, child care. The facts are facts. I mean, you can't expect to go into a corporation and get the same opportunities and be at the same status and the same level if you took off 3 months to have a baby as a guy who meanwhile was working 60 hours a week.
Okay, but but what about, okay, that might be the case maybe later on in their careers, but how do you explain, some of like the men and women just getting out of college, where the first 10 years of their lives, they're not having babies, but men are still getting promoted more quickly than women. And I think that and again, I don't have statistics about this, but I also get the sense that perhaps companies are maybe slow to promote women because they think or assume that later on they're going to have kids, when that may not necessarily be true at all.
Okay, I would like to know. Yes, I see what you're saying. Now, I would like to get a closer look at those stats. So I think that's what we need. I mean, do women get the same start? Do they get the same running start in their careers as men? Do they get it? Do they get their foot in the door at the same rate as men? Because if that's true, and I suspect that it is, I suspect women are, freshly hired out of college at the same rate as men, at the same salaries or maybe more, I don't know, but at the same competitive salaries as men. I
don't think so.
The slowdown. Oh, why you don't think so?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So let's just imagine just for a moment, like let's take like some big investment firm like Merrill Lynch or something, or Morgan Stanley, okay, and which is mostly the vast majority of their managers are men, and if they have and those, I just have a very hard time believing that if you get let's say 10 candidates out of NYU Stern School of Business, for instance, freshly graduated, all applying at a Merrill Lynch, that the executive level decision maker is not going to favor the male graduates from Stern over the women. I just find that hard to believe.
Okay, I think that we may be on to one of the differences between men and women here then. It could be, All right, I mean, the fact is women are different from men psychologically, spiritually. We are more self-sacrificing, we're more caring, we're more empathetic. I think that we're more into cooperation as opposed to competition. There are many things about women that are, crucial to the survival of the species. If you left men to be the carers, God help us.
You're revealing that your own biases. I mean, there's some women that are going to be graduating from Stern School of Business that are just as cutthroat,
sure.
Investment bankers as anybody else.
I'm sure that's true. And I'm sure that those women would come across that way in an interview. But I think that there may be, especially in the fields you're talking about. I mean, for the most part, men may be more suited to those jobs because they might have the interest in numbers and the interest in business and the interest in killing their competition and the interest in just eating up money and whatever. They might be more psychologically suited to that, whereas women are more psychologically suited.
What you're saying is exactly the problem, which is that people have these sort of, biases or assumptions about how women think and how they're going to work in the workplace versus men, which then influences whether or not they're hired at a place like Merrill Lynch. I understand that affirmative action is problematic. We can't you can't be having people say like, oh, you're required to hire this many, whatever, and checking off all of these.
Check the boxes, right?
Yes, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to convince you of is that affirmative action as a legal guideline is still needed, and because it's still needed, and I think it is still we still need it, particularly for women in the workplace specifically, because it puts a little bit of pressure, I guess, on hiring managers and decision makers at companies to, think twice, I guess, before disregarding a female applicant or a female employee that's already employed, being hesitant to promote that employee just because they think, oh, well, she just got married, she's probably going to start, kicking out babies in 5-10 years, there's no point in promoting her, to director now, because, you know what I mean? I feel like, so I feel like affirmative action as a legal guideline, it puts a little pressure on companies to train their employees and their hiring managers. Right.
But I think what you're saying, I think how this shakes out is something like you want people to be forced to take horrendous little courses. They have to sit through
that's not what I'm saying.
Dreary videos in which they are educated, and they have these little scenarios where Lakeisha comes in and says, "Say, Jonathan Whiteface, I am really interested in this new opportunity." And Jonathan Whiteface says, "You? What do you mean, you? You?" Anyway, continued. So
that's very funny because you and I both used to write courses like that. We used to be employed writing courses exactly like that. Yes.
I feel sorry for the people who had to take my courses. I can tell you that.
Maybe affirmative action needs to be rewritten or something, or reconceived, and in such a way that more highly educated women can get good jobs and keep them, and have more opportunities for promotion. Because I get the sense right now that they are being discriminated against. That's what I think. And I think that a good affirmative action policy, maybe it needs to be rewritten in a certain way. Affirmative action guidelines can help counter that, because I feel like the most obvious explanation for the reason why all these highly educated women are sitting around stuck in some entry-level job is because they're being discriminated against. I have been in, I have worked in tech, for instance, and almost all of the senior management jobs, almost all, are occupied by men, and there were many women like me who were highly qualified who kept getting passed over for promotions.
Okay, that's really
and someone like me was already done with the child rearing. There's no more babies. We way past that point, but still not getting promoted.
Okay, I think we have dueling anecdotes here because I've had the opposite experience. I don't know. When it comes down to dueling anecdotes, I'm afraid we're not going to go anywhere with this. And we also have a problem with different interpretations of the stats. I think there are just numbers just tell only one thing, just that there are fewer women than men in these higher positions. And to me, that could mean so many things. Women are not as suited, they are not as interested, they are not as qualified because they have not worked 60 hours a week like their darn absentee husband men do. I wouldn't just look at those numbers and say, obviously, someone's being discriminated against. I mean, this is what happened at Harvard and at UNC. Is that
right? But okay, I could understand that if there was like a slight, discrepancy in the percentages, but there's huge discrepancies in the percentages. That's why it's natural for people to assume that there's some kind of discrimination going on, because there's huge discrepancies between the men in positions. I keep going back to the management positions because that was the most stark contrast. And so I would buy what you're saying if there was just a slight, kind of like the pay gap. I'm not totally convinced that the payment gap is as huge of a deal as a lot of people make of it, because the percentage is not huge. But the women in management position, the discrepancy is huge, and that's why I think it's reasonable to interpret that as women still being discriminated against for whatever reason.
Okay, do we have any testimony from women in mid-management and up who say, I know that I was held back because of my gender. I know it, and here's my evidence?
Well, you could use my testimony. I feel that my gender played a significant role.
Okay.
So I feel that my gender and the fact that I already had kids, not that I was having babies, but that I already had kids and had duties as a mom, I do feel played a role. So I noticed that I was not being promoted as quickly as, say, like, single women or women who were unmarried or who were never had kids or whatever. And I was working 60 hours a week. I was killing myself.
Yeah.
Along with and having children at the same time. I mean, it was, very few candidates that were vying for positions of like directorship or whatever that I was going for worked as hard or as many hours as me. Very few.
Okay, I don't know what happened in your situation. I mean, I wasn't there. And maybe that was what happened. Maybe you had a kind of a bro culture where the people who were the people who were at the next level up were the bros, and they wanted to bring in more bros. Maybe it was that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Cliques form in every company, cultures form in every company, and I worked in a company that I jokingly talked about, okay, I better not, I won't say the ethnicity, but the ethnicity mafia. It was a joke, because there were so many people from this kind of obscure ethnicity, and I used to kind of laugh, oh yeah, she's from the, ethnicity mafia, but actually, to be fair, I'm going to say I don't think they discriminated. They didn't care about, they would bring in anyone from any culture. But I think that it's probably true that cliques form and that cultures form, and that people would rather bring people from that culture up into the clique.
Yes. Yes, and along that same line. So, and this is another reason why I think affirmative action is still very necessary, because especially in tech, for instance, a lot of times the hiring managers sometimes were not even from America. They were from other countries.
Okay, that's a problem.
Where it is, yes, exactly. And this is why I think we still need affirmative action to train them, because they're some of them coming in from other countries and occupy very high levels in tech.
Yeah.
and are responsible for making huge decisions, and they're coming from countries where it is perfectly normal and accepted and encouraged to discriminate against women.
Yeah,
And-
that's
and
another
then-
issue. Yeah.
Okay, but it's all part of my argument
I totally admit
about why
that,
we still need it.
Yeah. Men from traditional cultures, and go ahead and get me in trouble, I don't care who you are, men from traditional cultures working in America will put up barriers to, well, not only
Yes.
women, Vicky, but also people from outside their culture. I mean, they do prefer their own ethnicity. And I have
Yes.
even heard, for instance, okay, I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say it. Indians working in tech will actually prefer their own caste. They not only want to hire other Indians, they want to hire their own freaking caste. They bring all that bullshit culture to America.
Right. So maybe that will then convince you why we still need affirmative action in the workplace at least.
Well,
because we do. Think about it. Right now, because everybody uses the internet every day, internet dominates our lives. Tech companies dominate our lives. Okay, they dominate our lives.
Yeah.
And many of our huge tech companies are the high management positions are people from other countries. They are.
Well,
And,
that's another issue. And it's true. Probably those people do need to be told, hey, look, you're in America now. Shove your caste. Shove your stupid, moronic traditions that you fled in the first place. I mean, this is the sort of thing you want to say to these people, but if you say that, then of course you get accused of everything in the world. So,
right, and you're going to be accused of that just for saying that right now. But
I know.
Can you see the angle that I'm working here, the perspective I'm trying to give you? So I do, when I think about affirmative action, why we still need a workplace, the idea that runs in my mind is my own experience at tech companies. And I think it's not only because it's like you said, the bro culture and everything, also because we have, huge immigrant communities that work for those companies and, move up very quickly in those companies because of their technical skills.
Yeah, their technical skills. That's another thing. Men have more native talent for math. I mean, just
But so do well, if you want to talk about like stereotypes, there are plenty. If you want to talk about like stereotypes about Indians, for instance, in tech, Indian women also are extremely talented in math too.
Okay. In that case, I don't think what we need is affirmative action. I think what we simply need is an aggressive enforcement of our existing laws that require fairness in promotion and hiring and college admissions policies. And if anyone thinks that they have been discriminated against on the basis of their race or their gender or their ethnicity, whatever, then they have a case that they should take to Edward Bloom and say, look, I was fully qualified for this position, for this promotion, for this position in college, for this slot in college, and I was denied on the basis of my immutable characteristics of how I was born. That's what I think. It's not so much affirmative action. It's not promoting this person over that person or being aware of your subconscious biases. It is slapping people in the face with legal consequences, with lawsuits if they aren't fair.
Right.
That's what I think. That's how I think it should be done. That is how you get rid of that problem. You punish it out of existence. You don't try to.
Okay.
You don't try to educate.
Well,
people
how come we aren't already punishing it out of existence? I mean, what's holding people back?
Well, you tell me. Did you feel that you had a legal case against your company?
I actually did. I felt I had a significant legal case actually, and I felt intimidated. I was afraid. I was afraid that I was afraid of them trying to ruin my life or something.
Okay,
to be honest.
I admit it's scary to take someone to court like that because you could lose.
Yes.
And you're taking time out of your life to press this lawsuit. If you lose, you're out so much money or whatever, unless you're being.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Unless your lawyer's working on a pro bono basis, but.
Right, and what I'm saying is it would have been a lot easier if the male managers who were like in charge of my being promoted were better trained. It would have just made my life a lot more easier if somebody was keeping them in check, I guess, to a certain degree. They, in anticipation of, the female candidate who's up for promotion complaining, I think they arm themselves with excuses or reasons why the other male was better. That happened a lot. It happened a lot advocating for myself and also advocating for other employees that worked for me that were passed over.
Okay, well, we've got dueling anecdotes here again, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Which is going to take us nowhere. We've got dueling anecdotes and we've got dueling interpretations of the stats. And
okay, but I think I convinced you to a little bit, possibly, that in the tech industry that we might have a problem, and that's why we still need to have some of these guidelines in place. I think I've convinced you a little bit that certain sectors.
Okay, well, what I think is that I thoroughly 100% admit that people have prejudices and biases, and that those things will always exist, and they will be tempted to go along with their prejudices and their biases. And particularly in the case of these damned backwards traditional cultures, they won't even be apologetic about it. They'll just be right up front about it. I mean, they will just go ahead and do it, and they will laugh at the very idea of promoting or even admitting people from outside their clique, outside their whatever their tribe. And I know that that's going to persist. And that is why I think we have laws against that thing, and we have mechanisms to prevent and to prevent that sort of thing and to punish it where it occurs. So that's
I understand that, but I don't think it's working. It's not working. I know that we have those laws, but I don't think it's working. I don't think it's doing anything to stop people from especially if we have people from other cultures that are in decision-making roles. I don't think it's doing anything to stop them from discriminating against women, to be honest.
They still do their thing. Maybe the whole solution.
There's got to be something that can be done about that. There's got to be something that can be done about that.
Lawsuits.
Okay, well, like we just went over this. It's extremely difficult for women, especially women employees, to carry out a lawsuit.
It's difficult for anyone to carry out a lawsuit, but you have to be up to it. I mean, look, you have to look, everyone, get serious. Gird your loins. Sue the bastards. I did it once, and I won, and I became a legend in that company. Yeah, yes. And
yes, you told me this story before.
These tools are there. All these mechanisms, all these processes, these institutions, they are there for you. And just for heaven's sakes, this is America. Pick them up, use them. And I do know that it's difficult because when this translates into the human world, that changes a lot. And I mean, that might be, 70% of the consequences, 70% of the whole process might be just the human factors. But if you are really determined and you're really up to it and you really are committed and you have this principle and you're willing to fight for other people, not just yourself, you'll have to do it. And you'll probably have to, you'll become one of those people that they make movies about. Just because you went to HR and you demanded that this thing be changed, that you get this thing, you get this accommodation that you were entitled to, or not even an accommodation. You get this, whatever privilege, or this thing that you were entitled to, and you actually get it. I mean, I know that this is a sort of thing that really takes courage. It really takes determination and. Sticking to it. It takes persistence. It takes an ability to sustain a lot of psychological damage, a lot of attacks, a lot of depression. I mean, there's times when you just feel down, when you feel beset, embattled, and it takes a lot to get through a process like that. But people, you just have to do it.
Okay, well. I disagree. I think we need we need to change something to prevent it from happening in the first place, and forcing, I mean, if every woman was to address the discrimination that she's faced in the workplace, I mean, we'd have to motivate thousands and thousands of women to file huge, intimidating lawsuits. And I think it would be a lot easier to just simply, I don't know, change or reconceive affirmative action somehow, or rewrite it somehow so that we can prevent just life from being so miserable for highly qualified female employees in the workplace.